we know there's no beginning. So that's
Yeah.
that's useful.
Yeah. Well, Sam Austin, mate, it's been a bloody pleasure to meet you, and I'm really glad that we're sitting down and doing this. So first of all, thank you for stepping into this space with me.
Thank you for having me, man. I really
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah. It's a strange thing to try and recalibrate to building a connection with each other and stepping into some creative space when there is this impending, I don't know, it's probably already set in the stage a bit negatively with a word like impending, but when there's that third party, an invisible third party in the room,
Yeah.
because something that's characterized all of our interactions has been, it has been almost like that there has been a safety to step into that space of real collaborative expression. So how do you feel, first of all, about, like, what does it feel like to now be sitting here doing this?
Yeah, there's definitely already a kind of tangible presence almost that is frankly mind made.
Right.
But I'm very aware of it. And yeah, I agree. Most of our conversations have been like, the framework has been anything goes, essentially. And it still is the case, but we're acutely aware that, you know, things can be perceived in ways that we don't actually intend. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that is precisely it. There's something about expression that requires a container that's appropriate for it, which is a thread that I've been working with for a long time. You can think about it in terms of, when do you speak truthfully to, for example, a child about a particular experience? You know, do you give them the hard dose of truth before there is somewhere they can be held when that truth perhaps overwhelms a particular conception of the world they had? And so it's sort of like there's that to take into account too. And then there's also, what of yourself do you show when you're not precisely sure who is going to receive that energy? What will they be doing with it? Even to use the word energy is something that, I mean, it's so metaphorical in some sense that even by using it, I'm conscious that you and I can begin to resonate with what we might mean by that. But some listeners might already be like, whoa, what energy? What's going on?
Yeah. Well, I find it interesting as well that the energy tends to, for me, have more value a lot of the time than the words do.
Right.
Because the energy that's exchanged in the conversation tends to tell me more about what the person's really trying to say than what their words are. That sounds pretty absurd, I think, when I've just said it.
It sounds beautiful to me.
Yeah, but it really is. It really does feel like you can pick up on. Well, I suppose it comes back to something as abstract as telepathy in some ways. I had a conversation recently with friends where we were exploring that as a concept, and what we come to realize is, even in the word itself, telepathy, as you break it up, tele and pathy, seems to have its origins in like tele-empathy, and it's more about you're feeling the exchange of the other person's energy more than you're seeing the words that are inside their mind. You're feeling what they intend to say. And that itself seems to be a good natural container for conversations too, just to have pure intentions. A lot of the time when we're exploring these more controversial ideas, part of what I really appreciate about our exchange is that we can entertain ideas without necessarily being identified with them. And with that boundary set, we can then really dive into it to explore deeper than where we're, let's say, authentically at or embodying at this moment. And that would be a really useful framework itself, perhaps,
Yeah.
to set it in the beginning of podcasts like this.
Yeah.
For the ongoing progress of Voiceclub.
Right. I agree with you. The idea being that the ideas we explore here ought not be taken to be the sort of fixed representations of who we are.
Yes.
Right. However, we also have to seed the expression of those ideas with a certain sort of intention that has a purity that can only come from some sort of authentic manifestation of who we are. Which is a strange oppositional thing to hold as well. But before we go too much deeper, this is, in some sense, we're not even entirely sure what we're doing here, but for whatever we're doing here, it's important, I think, that you express to me, but also our audience, who you are, and perhaps a little bit about how we came to know each other. And I'd also like to hear about Live, Learn, Evolve, LLE, and what that project is. And yeah, I'll begin there. I don't want to...
Yeah, no worries. Well, yeah, my name's Samuel Austin. I'm playing the role as Live, Learn, Evolve founder, which is, the website's livelearnevolve.com, and it's essentially I'd say it's a kind of digital rabbit hole. Essentially, it's a blog, but over the years, it's evolved from being like a site that's focused on self-improvement from the get-go, and slowly over time has explored various Western philosophies, then gone into more kind of Eastern and esoteric subjects, meditation, yoga, Buddhism, these kind of psychedelics, and kind of culminated now as an overall digital rabbit hole of content where, yeah, any of these topics users can go and dive into the platform itself and explore it and find a whole of content.
Yeah.
And it's been a natural reflection of my own journey, actually. The content itself, if you were to go through the pages of the site, it's very much reflecting exactly where I am and the other writers, and what I've been resonating with at the time has been the inspiration to actually share that onto the page.
Right.
And so it's been very natural in its evolution.
That comes through quite a lot in that sometimes we have a certain conversation and I'll see something appear on the site, or you'll share something and it feels as though, that's something you're grappling with or battling with. That's probably my language. I usually battle with ideas. Maybe you're slightly smoother than me. But if I could sum up much of the focus that seems to be put forward, it's various pieces of insight into the process of transformation. It does seem to me to be that way. And I would say it's the dance of transformation. That might be one of the core things that characterizes our shared interest. And the interesting thing about that is perhaps the least unique interest you could actually have. Although expressing it at a certain way, at a certain point of resonance with someone, is necessarily unique. That's another one of those oppositional kind of things. And that's another strange tension that has just come to be ever more apparent in my own experience, which is that some of the most fundamental aspects of life, of experience, things you might be tempted to identify with as special and meaningful about your life, are in fact of a source, of a shared possibility that everyone can experience. So some of the most meaningful things in life are in fact the most fundamental things there are to do, and that can be expressed in so many ways. I mean, you might think about it in terms of shared stories we all participate in. You might think about it in terms of archetypes. I know we often talk about and have that sort of dance between the relevance for expression between sort of form and void, or what is primary in some sense in how we ought characterize the state of experience that might be associated with a kind of like an emptiness or a no thingness, and then the other side of the coin, so to speak, the grasping of the world again, the identifying with it again, the contemplating it, the fixing it. There seems to be, that process itself of releasing from identity and then grasping it again is in some sense an engine of the most profound nature. It's the most profound thing we do. It might characterizes us as well as a sort of like niche constructors. As human beings, we're so weak and everything is futile when we're born, and it takes us so long to develop, and we have this machinery that enables us to adapt. And so one of the most fundamental things we are from all these perspectives is that which transforms. And we resonate strongly about that. So it's this like, is that we resonate, I resonate, but to resonate involves relinquishing the I that resonates. And here we are filming ourselves in
the process.
So it's so strange. Like it's like always the coin flipping ever more meta, and in some sense the absurd point of view is always there as well. You can it's important to laugh at it. So I guess that's a bit of a riff on transformation, but do you think that's a fair characterization of the transformation and LLE and the resonance that you look to promote?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely been a natural outcome of that dance of transformation, of seeking actually myself spiritually.
Right.
And then out of that which manifests as resonating with me has then supplied the inspiration to go and share that with an article or a video or even just on the Facebook page.
How do you see your world developing now? Like, how do you see yourself? Like, it's because it's a strange thing, right? We participate in this interweaving web of society and the cosmos that is so much larger than us, but I don't think, and I believe you hold the same view, that we can't consider it separate from us in some fundamental sense. And so we are non-dual with it, yet we also have to take on roles at times, many roles throughout our lives, perhaps many roles in the same period of your life with different people, where we perform different functions oriented still by that shared resonance, hopefully. But the point is, nevertheless, we do fix ourselves in the world for certain purposes, and I'm genuinely interested in you, and I'm genuinely interested in how you see yourself fitting the world. What role, like what feels resonant to you in terms of concretizing yourself in it?
I don't put much energy into the future, actually. It's kind of dropped off a lot in terms of, if you're saying about like, where might I see this path that you've seen formulating, where it might go, I have no idea. It's actually, and I actually have a preference for that, because when I kind of give up any fixed goal of where it might go, I find that there's a lot more freedom. And whilst it's important that I do set goals, because I am someone that's very low on conscientiousness, and by actually aiming for them and being aware that the goals can dynamically move and adjust as you move forward, a lot of this path has just been one of surrender. It's been a lot of giving up what I think about the world and allowing reality itself to present its symbols and its signposts for me, and then me following that intuitively in the moment. And that's really where there's a lot of freedom. So yes, there are a few things on the radar at the moment for the future where I think I may focus my attention.
Yeah.
You know, whether that's like recently becoming a yoga teacher, for example, which I never thought I would have done at all.
Right.
It was far off the spectrum. But just using that as an example, there were many, many synchronicities and instances whereby the people around me were out of nowhere suggesting that that is something that I should pursue without me even saying anything.
Right.
You
However, you do have a nature that, I mean, I say the feeling I get from you is authenticity, you know, and I don't want to put that too high on a pedestal. Like, so don't worry, I'm not. Occasionally you appear authentic. No, I mean, you do. And what that suggests is that, in fact, what is reflected back to you, should those relationships have a certain degree of honesty towards the direction of some real reflection, well, you'll receive information there that might help shine the light on something real for you to realize about your nature. So it's interesting because, you know, and I find that very resonant, attractive, necessary, this attitude towards no fixed outcome. However, we also have to have goals, and so there is a conversation to be had about just what the process of reimagining those goals are and how all that works. But it perhaps would not be right to formulate showing up in the world as authentic as itself being an outcome. It's perhaps much more, I might say, some sort of aligning yourself with an appropriate expression or way to be. But that mode itself is presenting. It's like it. Yeah, I suppose it's allowing yourself to be realized in a way that's not solely relying on its own, like it's not a perverted incestual way of realizing self. I mean, Jung speaks about individuation as something that also has to be carried out in relationship with others, and that idea is resonant with what we've already begun to articulate here as a sort of deeper sense of interconnectedness. So yeah, I don't have a fixed place I'm really heading with this expression, but there does seem to be a commitment. The point is that there is a commitment here to a certain way of being, even if it's not a commitment to a fixed outcome, which I think perhaps is important to make conceptually clear.
Yeah, I would definitely, I'd definitely say there's been a noticeable shift in the way I ontologically orient myself in the world that has been quite profound, and it's nothing new at all or unique to me. But it's a shift from attention being focused on the inner narrative to attention focusing on the space between the thoughts. It's like just a residing in the space of being through many years of just surrendering and listening in to the heart space, to the intuition, whatever you want to call it, and then acting from there.
Yes.
As opposed to the other way around, which caused me a lot of suffering. I think it causes a lot of people suffering, the attachment to that inner narrative.
Yes.
A lot of the time because it's a conditioned narrative, or it's influenced by external things we don't have control over. And that's brought about a lot of inspiration anyway. In spirit. Spirit.
I understand. I think that the articulation of acting from the place between stimulus and response is a critical articulation, and learning the process, practicing the process of embodying that disposition in your life seems to me a necessary part of growth and transformation and ultimately self-transcendence. It enables you to actually take the world in, which is fundamental.
Yeah, you drop out of being confined to any particular lens as well.
At least
in some ways,
the movement towards that way, and perhaps it's entirely, it can go as far as entirely being that way. Although it's at to describe the place from which there is no lens is, in some respects, I mean, that really is undescribable. I would say that's a pure, well, you might push back on this, and it would be good to push back, because I would say that what came to mind would be to say it's a pure chaos of experience. However, it does seem like the accepting of a place of no lens, transcending that experience, therefore, of chaos, is something that is attainable.
Well, I tend to see if your orientation is primarily focused on the inner narrative, to me that is chaos. And the light of awareness, by apperceiving reality, by dropping back into being, you're in some ways that is bringing order to the chaos. However, that does put you in a strange position, and I suppose it's always going to sound paradoxical when we talk about these things, but it puts you in a place where you're standing right now is facing the unknown. Because you're giving up any ideological lens or preconceived assumptions or whatever, and you're just facing reality as it is now. And that, to some extent, can be akin to facing chaos.
Yes. No, I understand. I would say the idea of associating chaos with too much attention paid to the inner narrative is right, but it would seem to me that a more accurate way of stating it would be to say, well, precisely, too much identification with the inner narrative leads to chaos. It is also helpful to attend to the inner narrative.
Attending, I think the right word you used there was identification as well. That's one that is more of an issue than attending to it. Yeah.
Right. And but even then, we take on roles for certain times. So it's so perhaps a more mature way yet to refer to what it is to take on an identity, or to attend to it as you perform it, or to perform an identity in relation with other people in a situation in the world, that's something that ought be done lightly to some degree, right? But then I also feel what comes to me here is that it's worthwhile to express the importance of while we do release, and while it is in an important sense important to face the unknown, we're not relinquishing absolutely everything about what is helpful to bring with you to navigate that space. It's not, I would say, about, for example, completely abandoning all lessons of the past. I wouldn't say it's about regression, although sometimes perhaps a little bit of fun on the slightly more immature, or at least innocent side of things is necessary. So when we're talking then about stepping into the unknown, what is the kit that is in fact brought along that helps navigate this dance of transformation? Is that a question? Like, is what I'm saying? Do you feel me there? Do you feel that there's something worth articulating?
Yeah. Well, I think what it perhaps comes down to is the importance of cultivating presence, awareness. Whether that's through a daily meditation practice or something where you're dipping into that space more frequently, so that you familiarize yourself with being lensless, if you want to call it that, or just because in the beginning it's quite difficult. There's a lot of, there's whole sections in bookstores dedicated to mindfulness these days. It's recognized now as something that's important. Although I find the mindfulness word quite funny, as in be mindful of how full your mind is. But essentially, that's almost like a westernized version a lot of the time of what has been primarily something that the Eastern philosophy has been so focused on. And they're not so much interested in being aware of how full your mind is. They're more interested in clearing the mind.
Right.
And that is something that doesn't just happen instantly, for sure. There's certainly a practice. If we're talking about a toolkit, we're seeing those toolkits emerge right now. Yoga studios and breath work and psychedelics. These are all ways to help clear the mind. And yeah, it's useful to mention that, because even in the spiritual spheres, a lot of people tend to jump on the non-dual approach of saying, well, we'll just wake up now and realize that you're not your thoughts and be done with it, and it's just a spontaneous thing which can end now. But and that is actually normally associated with some spiritual gurus or spiritual people that are giving talks, or they're running certain online education programs, and this is our way, etc. And there's perhaps a little said of the relative aspect of awakening, which is very much the dance between surrendering back to being and then going back into the world as the actor, and through that process cultivating the space of being, so that what you're actually doing is you're informing the mind body with presence, and over time that seems to allow you to apperceive more of reality as it is.
Something that came up for me when you were speaking was that a characteristic of this cultivation, this development of the experience that persists through transformation might be something like the development of the belief in yourself, self with a big S, development of the belief in your soul, an identification with the very possibility. It's like the transcendent spring of possibility that enables and is the precondition for experience at all, the precondition for joy, for suffering, importantly the precondition as well for the transcendence of suffering, and that it's this something that typifies my experience, and I would suggest typifies the experience of all of us, really, is this unfortunate aspect of the dance between connection and disconnection, which is that you can sometimes feel more disconnected than you feel connected. And the word faith comes to mind here, and to be used like it's almost as though you cultivate a faith in your capacity to remember and come home again, to find connection again. So it's this at one thing of remembering the ember within, the home within, even as you face out into the unknown.
Yeah, and faith is the non-rational, isn't it? It's the
transrational, even.
Yeah. And a lot of the time, the reason that's pointed back as a surrender, I often say surrendering mentation, is purely because a lot of the time the individual is so caught up and identified with their thoughts. The toolkit they need is to be shown that by giving up mentation, or just surrendering mentation for a moment, is the way for them to bring more balance back. Because when you do bring balance back, mentation isn't an issue, overthinking necessarily, because you're primarily sitting in the space between you've already kind of balanced out. It's like we talked earlier about, maybe it's not the best topic to bring up, but
here.
free will and determinate, like
yeah,
predetermination. You know?
Not the best, but
No, it's
no, please
like,
go
it's
there.
just kept. But no, just the idea that I would see even in myself before I went down the path of exploring anything spiritual, I would look back on that as being a very automated way of living. It was pretty much devoid of free will in the way that I look at it now. And that freedom seems to have been regained by using these tools to cultivate the space between stimulus and response.
Right.
So that now I can clearly discern what is a habituated action or patterned thought process, conditioned, and what is just pure and arising as inspiration and intuition and authenticity as it is.
Two things come to mind. One is that due to the grand complexity of life, the complexity that we're involved in, the immense age of the universe and our biological lineage, and perhaps our metaphysical lineage, the number of ways to express just how patterned our existence is it's insurmountable. I wonder if it's truly insurmountable, right? Like, so this place of, it's not clear to me that authenticity as such is means to act from a place where you are totally attendant to a pure arising, where that's understood as not being itself just an expression of another pattern. Seems to me more like the identification with the realization or the transcendence of previous patterns and sort of like the voluntary realization of a, what more metaphors come to mind, higher frequency, there's a more maturity, a deeper sense of awareness and fittedness. It's appropriate for you to walk within a wider net of conception of the world. There's more, you can appropriately identify right action in greater domains, larger domains. But that the process itself, I think this is somewhere where we would again resonate, that the process itself of that, I mean, it's never ending. Like, is it? Would you say the unpacking, the detangling of becoming who you are?
I would. Yeah, it doesn't seem to end. It would seem that we move to a higher process, you might say, instead. But one that is, I suppose, almost like biomimicry. For some reason that comes to mind, because then the process of your action springs from nature. So perhaps it's not a mimicry, but by process, by it being pure, what I mean is it's not conditioned by anything previous.
Perhaps previously from a mind's conception of what the world ought to be. We would say, because it's funny, like, depends almost what perspective you want to take on it. It's like, I have no children. One day, if I am so fortunate, although I can't even hold on to this too much, it would be beautiful to raise children I don't know what that's like. And I presume that there are ways that I can develop so that I might be able to do that in a fashion that's more capable than I perhaps could now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's say developing those skills from the perspective of where we're at in this conversation, one part of that would be perhaps waking up into an inherent nature that is there waiting to be activated. So it's embedded within me already to realize. And so to the extent awakening that could be understood as, again, this kind of growth, then I am awakening to something that has a profoundly deep role, narrative, pattern of adaptive functioning in society, in the world. And so in that sense, there is something in me to be awoken that is, from one angle, sort of preconceived. It's like there's a seed there that can evolve into something. It's the manner in which it evolves and particularizes. It's like, it's not just the seed, it's the seed and the ground, and they sort of have to accept each other. And so the dance of transformation occurs between, again, seed and ground, agent and arena, me and the world in this case, or a family, in a relationship or whatever it is. So,
and the seed and the ground, I mean, another way to also look at it is perhaps the flower blooming when it's ready. You can't kind of force a bud to open. But perhaps when we live in this space of connecting to where our inspiration is behind the conditioning, we're living in a way that's in line with kind of nature itself.
Yes, where there's something in me here. Okay, so this is another place that we often go to in the dance we do, which is, so we've been sort of discussing the surrender component, the relinquishing of narrative and identity that have become fixed in this moment to align with a novel, authentic reimagination of how to be in the world. Now, an important part of that process has to then be, okay, now we're acting in the world. Now we are fixing it again. Now we are grasping it again. And that to me is as important as being able to relinquish or surrender. So it's this confrontation. And I used to use the terms confrontation and to surrender to sort of articulate something like this with respect to navigating psychedelic experience. And look, they're words and it doesn't really matter. Like, what matters is the meaning. And there's something about confrontation that maybe is slightly too conflictual. And so I would say it's this mixture of, it's a cooperative confrontation of grasping. And again, it's about the cycle. So whenever you fixate too much on one, you destroy its actual meaning and its function, because they co-occur. But nevertheless, we do fix the world, we do grasp it, and we step out, and the ego like bravely steps forward again in its vulnerable and doomed self. Like, it's the price of it is death. The price of identity is death, but the identity itself is to be loved as well. Even though it cannot last, must be made subservient to the process of the transformation. But I'm very interested in what processes, in what collective processes enable the grasping as well, right? We have to be doing both, because you might say a shadow of of the surrender can tend towards an apathy to, or whatever comes.
Mm-hmm.
Now maybe that's one of it, or maybe there's a sense of agency that's lost. Maybe it's maybe surrendering to, hey, I guess a danger of surrendering at the wrong time might be manipulation by others, potentially. So I don't know how that sounds to you there. There's so many different ways to take that, I know. So I mean,
Yeah, well, yeah, generally in the world at the moment, I think it's fair to say that there's an overabundance of thinking with a lack of being. So it's more human doing than it is human being. So I think part of the solution being orientated to surrender is perhaps temporary, just so that we can restore balance.
so
And
the
then
context matters.
so
that
context
point, right?
does matter. Yeah, it does.
So in some sense, it's like you and I can talk about perhaps ways to be with each other, things we might do in the world. And it's like, this is where like things become so like concretizing messages, right? And can God slip so easy into a misinterpretation, and worse still, a sort of engorged sense of importance, and sometimes to commoditization. Although I think you have to have a slightly different intent for that as well. But it's like, well, it's something so strange about us having this conversation and it being listened to make judgments about the world more broadly. But I do agree with you. I feel that too. At least in the cultures that I've been a part of and grown up in, is that space of surrendering to the moment is the capacity to surrender to the moment is a critical skill. But to whether or not one, like there's an over in indulgence of one or the other, like which way the balance is tipping, God, like very difficult to prescribe outside of the actual realization of yourself in relationship with someone else. It's tricky. It's hard. Like, because who are we speaking? We have to speak. Who are we speaking to? We have to speak to individuals in some important sense.
Yeah, it's difficult to make overall blanket statements. I mean, I suppose you could say it's particularly obvious in the ecological sphere, in the way in which our relationship by the masses is disconnected from nature.
Yes.
I mean, that's very clear.
Yes.
And that seems to be a outer manifestation of our inner landscapes. I think it's fair to say that. And the reason why I feel like I can say that confidently is because I've watched it in myself, for sure, and I've seen that interplay, even down to just the way I navigate the most mundane experiences in life, like, say, making a cup of tea in my daily routine, and how much presence, how much attention is paid to the world, and how that is a natural reflection of the way I'm navigating things in the interior landscape. But it's also this space, it's connecting with this space that to me is actually what meaning is. It's less that I find meaning in particular things, as much as meaning seems to be imbued in direct correlation to how present I am, how full the experience of being alive, or how much apperception there is of just the felt presence of experience, then seems to imbue whatever is contextually happening with meaning. It becomes a meaningful. And in some ways, a lot of the actions, and there's a lot of seeking I'm seeing in others, where it seems to be what they're seeking for is what is seeking.
Yes.
And so rather than point fingers at X person is doing this, X country is doing this, they should do that, etc., actually these seem to all be one problem. Actually, it's not really a political problem, necessarily an ecological problem, one of conservative or liberal, etc. It's transcending that. It's more of a rampantly untamed ego that has lost its connection to the source. And yeah, perhaps, as we said earlier, there's this temporary need to cultivate that space again, to bring harmony. And through that, what we should see is a natural balance with our relationship to the earth, to each other, politically, etc. It's almost transcends any need for more information, more knowledge. It's actually more wisdom. And to some extent, wisdom, it's more about the embodiment of knowledge, let's say.
Yes.
Than it is about accumulating anything. We're drowning in knowledge.
No, I think that's beautifully put. This is what I'm about to do is very selfish, but
I need to pee.
Well, good place to stop then. Let's check it. Let's make sure that was recorded.